Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Brad Forester, who's founder and CEO at JBF Consulting, and Mike Mulqueen, who is partner and strategy practice lead at JBF Consulting. And today we're going to talk about navigating the big trends in logistics technology, how to position yourself for implementation success. So if you've seen the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you'll know the following quote very well. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around you once in a while, you could miss it. And nowhere is that truer than the supply chain logistics realm, especially when it comes to logistics technology. And with so much change and innovation happening, and of course with the usual dose of hype thrown in there as well, it's hard for companies to know, where to begin and how to begin and what to focus on. So to help us understand some of the big trends and what's happening in the world of logistics technology, as well as to provide us with some insights and advice on how companies can position themselves for implementation success in 2025 and beyond. It's great to have, both Brad and Mike on the program. I've known both of them for, I think, close to 25 years now, going way back to their days at Manugistics. And now I think over almost 20 years now as part of JBF Consulting, where they're on the front lines of helping companies select the right technology solutions relative to what they're trying to achieve in their operations, and then also helping them navigate successful implementation. So they're two of the smartest guys I know in this area. So Brad, Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks, Adrian.
Good to be here.
So Brad, Mike, 25 years, you guys haven't aged a bit. What's your secret? Any skincare products you can recommend or anything like that?
I joke to my team. I send a meme of the Mrs. Doubtfire face with all the Cool Whip on his face. I'm like, yeah, this is my skincare regime, and that's how I stay looking like I'm 30 years old. It's just genetics, baby face forever.
Yeah. Well, yeah. All right. So whipped cream, or is it whipped cream, or what?
You got to go Cool Whip. There's
Cool Whip,
certain
yeah.
chemical combination in there that is magic. Yeah.
Okay,
Cool
great.
Whip.
Well, we're going to table that perhaps for another, Talking Logistics episode, maybe health and beauty tips for supply chain logistics executives. But let's dive into the topic at hand here. Maybe Mike, I'll start with you, and let's just go right into it. What are some of the logistics trends? And we could probably spend like a whole entire hour just talking about this. But from your perspective, what are some of the big logistics trends and themes you're seeing in the market today?
Yeah. So, and Adrian, as you know, TMS is kind of broken up into kind of different pieces, right? We have carrier TMS, we have broker TMS, we have forwarder TMS. JBF, we really work with shipper TMS, right? So we work with the large shippers. And the couple of things that we're seeing, one is I think that the days of a TMS trying to be everything to everybody are gone. And I think that at this point, the TMS applications, again, TMS is broken up into multiple different sub-processes, from planning and execution and tracking and freight settlement, et cetera. And TMSs are going to be good at some of those components, but they're not going to be good at all of them. So one of the big things that we're seeing is instead of just buying one TMS, we're essentially assembling ecosystems, best-in-class ecosystems. Our bias is always to try to use the backbone TMS for as much as we possibly can, but where the requirements exceed the capabilities of the TMS, the ability for us to kind of Lego block in capabilities from visibility providers or parcel management solution providers, or freight settlement providers even. That's something that, again, I think that a long time ago, we tried to build systems that could have depth in all those different areas, but transportation is just so deep that it just doesn't work. So the componentization, I think, is really important. And then the underlying architectures that we see that support that componentization. Things, we really like, for instance, what Manhattan is doing with their active platform and their microservices. It just enables us to have a little bit more flexibility. Oracle, Blue Yonder, these guys have really built out some nice solutions that support that. On the, a couple other areas that we're seeing is, there's so much FOMO around AI and ML, right? And it drives us crazy because so much of it's fake, but there's a lot of it that's real. And we're starting to see, especially with virtual agents, the ability to, or chatbots, things like that enable us to get access to the data. TMSs are treasure troves of data, but getting the insights out of the systems are really, really hard. So we're seeing, some really good virtual assistants using natural language processing that enables somebody to say, hey, how many loads did I have out of Texas this last week? And instead of going to my IT guy and requesting a report being generated or trying to do some filters within the application, the ability to get access to that data is just astounding. We're seeing, I love like the Copilot stuff that LoadSmart's built out. Pando, another new TMS provider, doing some really, really great stuff around not just the virtual assistant stuff, but also machine learning with the data. And especially for TMSs that are multi-shipper and the ability to have terabytes of data and truly find insights and use benchmark information, things like that. And that's the last big component that we're seeing, Adrian, is TMSs have always been somewhat insulated from reality at times, right? I have my rates, I have my locations, I have my carriers, I have my orders, but they're ignorant of port strikes. They're ignorant of what's the spot rate on the Waco to Atlanta lane that I'm dealing with right now. They're ignorant of the contract rates, right? So the ability for TMSs to be able to get information from all of these external sources, these, you used to call them infomerciaries way back in the day, right? To be able to get this information, absorb the information, and then help drive decision-making based on this like either geopolitical information, macroeconomic information, things along those lines. So again, a big changes, Adrian, that we've seen really over the last probably 5 or 6 years. Those would be kind of probably from a tech perspective, the biggest that I've been seeing.
Yeah, and I would concur. I mean, it's funny because I think I'm going to drop another 80s movie reference here, but it's almost like Back to the Future, right? Because I remember, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, you had this diversity of shipper TMS solutions, right? If you were going to try to manage your operations back then, you had to put in a one solution to do planning and optimization, a different solution if you had, private fleet, a different solution if you did also parcel, a different solution if you did, if you wanted to have dedicated, whatever, So you ended up, a lot of shippers ended up having to implement 3, 4 different solutions to cover the various aspects of their operation, especially if you did, again, if you had global, like if you did ocean, that was another application, right? And then, so what you saw during that time period is you saw all these mergers and acquisitions take place, right? Where TMS vendors are trying to expand the footprint, right? And create this one big solution that did it all. But to your point now, and then part of it is enabled by this newer technologies, these web-based services, architecture, APIs, and so forth, that we're going back to kind of this, decentralization, if you will, where now it's really the opportunity to really focusing on those areas that is truly best of breed, if you will, and be able to, bring together an ecosystem approach. I mean, we're using new terminology here than we did back then, but I think back then it was more difficult because a lot of these applications in the past were developed on proprietary platforms, so the integration was just a bear and everything else. But today, because you've moved more towards more standard architectures, leveraging of web services, I find it interesting that I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if I heard you wrong, that we're almost going back to the future now, but now we're in a better position to go that, assembling a best of breed approach, if you will.
Yeah, you didn't hear me wrong. Back in the day, we were ignorant of all of the different processes, and we tried to sell things. We tried to sell the manugistic solution that you mentioned earlier for big ocean carrier. Well, we didn't have the concepts. We didn't understand those processes well enough. And companies like GT Nexus came in. We tried to sell procurement solutions, but again, not really a lot of depth there. So the combined nets of the world, which is now part of Jagger, came in, right? So, and ultimately, I have seen the largest TMS providers become a lot more adept at some of those key capabilities. We are seeing fleet being a lot better in TMSs. Especially, I really like the OTM fleet capabilities that they built out. Manhattan's built out some really nice fleet capabilities. I do like those pieces, but some of the other areas that they're still not very strong at. So again, the ability back in the day, flat file interfaces using FTP, right? That's essentially what we were doing. And now all of a sudden we can pull everything together. And if we can't pull it together in the TMS, virtually every one of the large shippers that we're dealing with right now, Adrian, has a data lake. Vast majority are using Snowflake at this point. Again, a lot of times for the ML capabilities that are inherent in that application. But that's where we can then pull everything together for our tactical and strategic reporting needs.
Yeah, great. So, Brad, let me go to you now. I mean, how do you see everything we just talked about? I mean, how do you see these things influencing kind of the implementation and the operations of shippers?
Yeah, so I mean, we can talk about back in the day. all we want. But when Mike and I were implementing Manugistics in the 90s and the early 2000s, we had a relatively simple platform, right? It was somewhat monolithic, but we were really talking about a planning engine for decision support, and it was simple. And we had maybe 2 to 4 integrations to really, architect an implementation, and things took 4 months, 6 months, end to end. And now we're working with clients through the integration and implementation of all these new technologies. And we've had some clients with more than 140 integrations just to get their ecosystem kind of put together. So that has been a really dramatic shift, I think, over the past 20 years, is integration and automation and kind of supply chain orchestration from an end-to-end planning process. As Mike mentions, it starts way before the order is even captured, right? We have to procure capacity. We have to model different scenarios from a logistics execution standpoint. We also have to plan. We have to optimize. We have to execute, get visibility. And now all of those things are becoming more modular. And I kind of liken it to, cable TV. Many of us are probably Netflix or Apple TV Plus or Hulu, Amazon. We want to pick and choose. We want the a la carte options that meet our specific needs. And I think our enterprise shippers are clearly in the same boat. But I think one of the unforeseen consequences of the kind of the culmination of both the technology and the architectural shift, microservices, also the commercial change where software vendors are now ARR, annual recurring revenue, not a one-time license fee. They are forcing customers to create IT and operational things that are not common. For example, I'll give the example here. When clients were implementing transportation systems and they bought a license, our clients were in control of when they wanted to upgrade for new features and functions, right? And it usually was somewhere between 3 to 7 years. Obviously, there were outliers on both sides of that spectrum, but they were in control of the upgrade. Now with cloud, they're no longer in control. They are forced to take X number of upgrades per year. And when you deal with now a portfolio, or as Mike likes to call it, an ecosystem of vendors, where each vendor might have a different cadence of cloud upgrades and releases, that puts our clients both operationally and on the IT support side in a position where we're perpetually testing. We are perpetually rolling out new features and functions. We are perpetually changing how the end users are interacting with these systems. And it can be a big distraction. It can be an annoyance. It can also be systemically very problematic if things don't happen correctly. So the technology changes are really impacting the way that both IT and logistics operations groups are having to deal with that technology.
I hadn't really thought about that, and particularly, the fact that you do have this ecosystem of partners, and then they each have a different cadence to your point in terms of now, on an ongoing basis, introducing new capabilities and upgrades and so forth. I mean, I think it's a double-edged sword, right? Because in the old days, you would implement the TMS, the WMS, whatever, and then you would find out that they hadn't upgraded in 8 years, right? So they've missed out on all these new capabilities. And then so that was the negative side of that. It's like you weren't keeping up with the innovation. You weren't able to adjust very quickly. And in fairness, with the old model, an upgrade was almost like a brand new implementation, right? Because it was really a very costly, capital intensive. So there were reasons why companies were adverse to doing that. But I really hadn't thought through the benefits. I mean, I've thought through all the benefits in terms of getting continuously updated capabilities, but I hadn't really thought through, the operational and IT challenges that presents to clients. So that's very interesting. And so Mike, I mean, let me go to you. I mean, so obviously we just talked about some of the the challenges there or the implications of what these new technologies and architectures and so forth are introducing. And yeah, but obviously that's not going to hold companies back from implementing a TMS or WMS or any other logistics solution, if that's on their, agenda for the coming year, as they try to continuously drive continuous improvement and innovation. So, I mean, based on your experience, working with different companies and clients, I mean, how are the more mature buyers able to successfully navigate everything we just talked about to kind of put themselves in a position for success when it comes to the implementation and getting value, truly capturing the ROI that they built the business case around?
Yeah, and honestly, Adrian, so in my practice, organizations will have what they view as perhaps obsolete technology, or even, it's funny in 2024, almost 2025, some relatively large shippers don't have any technology, right? So they've never gone through the process, right? So as part of we do relatively quick, what I call, we call a blueprint internally, but think about defining your desired future state. So understanding what, from an organizational perspective, what capabilities in transportation do I need to have to support the business, not in today's state, but in 5 years, right? So this is actually then working with their leadership. What are we intending to do in terms of geographic expansion? Are we going to be doing mergers, acquisitions, divestitures? Are we going to do new channels? Are we going to go e-com? So we start with that, right? So we start trying to truly understand what direction this business is going to be looking at. And then that helps to understand, it creates at least the footing for us to then start saying, okay, now let's go into the capabilities that we need. So we do a lot of work, Adrian, even prior to looking at any technology at all. We define requirements, we build out conceptual design, completely agnostic to any technology. We build out, this is going to be our to-be state design. We define benefits and we quantify those benefits because we want those benefits to be embedded into the implementation. This is why we're doing this. We are not doing this implementation to implement a TMS. We're doing this to better the business, right? So we explicitly define those benefit areas, and then they should become part of, and when we do the implementation, they become part of a project charter, right? These are the specific objectives of this particular initiative. So we do all those pieces, and then, gosh, Adrian, you've seen just the complete explosion of different providers out there right now. We got the guys that have been around for forever, and they're great technology providers out there. I've mentioned some of them already, but then there's just a lot of great new tech out there as well. How do I figure out through these 40 different providers which ones that I should be going with? So we do a lot of due diligence in terms of the RFP process and the vendor selection process. We map out against all of their requirements, both their functional requirements as well as their technical requirements. We map out against the financial stability of the companies become really, really important, Adrian. You mentioned mergers and acquisitions before. We just saw Mercury get acquired. And I really do like that acquisition by Corber. I think that was just a great acquisition. Corber is a first-class organization. So I did really like that. But there's a lot of players out there that we're worried about them financially. And again, it's not the guys that I can go take a look at their 10Q on. It's not the Descartes and the Oracles and the SAPs of the world. It's the guys that are, they were relying on VC money. And again, the VC money ever since 2021 has truly dried up, right? So now we're seeing a lot of layoffs. We're seeing the potential of acquisitions. We're seeing some of the intellectual property just disappear, right? So we need to be super duper careful as we're going about and finding the right providers. We do a lot with references. When we're actually taking a look at some of those providers, Adrian, we actually make sure that the CFO of my company goes and talks with the leadership of these smaller companies as well, just to understand what their vision is, what their, do we have cash flow issues, right? Are we looking at potential layoffs or an acquisition, things like that? So there's a minefield. I have actually a chart that I use, and it's essentially a minefield of all the potential bad things that can happen when you're going through this process. And again, just to, kind of through doing this and working with various tech providers for a long period of time, we have a pretty good sense as to who the providers are that really are truly adding value to our shipper clients.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot there to unpack. I mean, I love, and I'm a big proponent of what you said initially, which is you got to really start with defining your desired outcomes and objectives, because if you don't take the time to do that work up front, you're really just setting yourself up for disappointment, at the back end. So it's not an easy process. It takes a lot of time. I'm sure you'll attest to that. But really getting, all the key stakeholders in the organization to truly understand, not only to your point, not only your current requirements, but where you're going to be in 5 years and what capabilities you're going to need and what KPIs are you trying to improve upon and why and so forth. I think doing all of that work up front is critical. The other thing you mentioned is that, it's I mean, as an industry analyst, it's sometimes even difficult for me. I mean, this is my full-time job, and I can't keep track of all the different, vendors that are out there. Every once in a while, and one of our talking logistics sponsors is Descartes. I mean, they're very highly acquisitive. Half the times they announce an acquisition of a company I had never even heard of before, or they weren't on my radar screen. So I'm like, holy cow, and they've been around for a while. So it's like, shame on me. I should have known about them. But, they're addressing a very, targeted part of the supply chain or the logistics function. And, I think going beyond not to pick on the industry analyst firms out there, but, I think people go through the, magic quadrant, which is a very finite number of vendors out there. And if they're really basing what they want to do based on just that finite universe, they may be missing out on, opportunities from other vendors that aren't on that chart that could actually be the right fit for them to solve their problem or to help them achieve their objectives. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. We look at we love the Gartner. We look at it all the time, right? We take a look at it. It is a starting point, though. If you're using that magic quadrant as the end all be all, you're making a big mistake, because they're putting a very select number of well, I mean, again, there's different magic quadrants. There's TMS, and then they have different reports for real-time visibility and fleet, et cetera. But they essentially, whether I'm a multi-billion-dollar big box retailer, or I'm a $20 million CPG guy, whatever it may be, I'm in the same table. I'm looking at the exact same table, but there's different needs based on industry, based on geography, based on the network flow types that we're dealing with. I'm heavy ocean versus heavy parcel. I'm still looking at the same exact chart, but there's completely different set of providers I should be really looking at depending on my specific needs. And I know people do try to short circuit processes. And I know that, you go to Magic Quadrant, and that's the CYA. I selected blankety blank vendor because they were the top of the Magic Quadrant. Well, that's probably not the best thing to do. That's a recipe for disaster, right? So again, it's a good starting point. It is not the end all be all. You need to do your homework. You need to do your due diligence. You need to define, and truly, Sun Tzu, right? You need to know who you are before you can go out and get new technology. And doing that upfront work, it's a relatively short period of time, a relatively small expense, but it's an insurance policy to ensure that ultimately you are selecting the best technology providers for your business.
Right.
We like to say that just to close out with a little piggyback here on Mike's comment, the magic quadrant is the shipper is nowhere in the magic quadrant. So don't hold the magic quadrant up as a mirror and expect to see your reflection there, because you're not there. You're not part of the magic quadrant 4-box criteria, right? And furthermore, to Mike's point, there are different magic quadrants, but most of our shippers don't necessarily know what they need, right? They could be Cargill, they could be Cisco Foods. Both of them have fleets, but they have very different fleet needs. There's probably no one solution that can solve both of those problems. So the magic quadrant is a great starting point, but don't write your thesis or your term paper off of the Cliff Notes interpretation of what this book was all about. Do your homework, do the due diligence. That's going to protect you in the long run.
Yeah, that's a great point. Again, I think the key takeaway, what we just talked about is, you have to put in a lot of this work up front, before you even get to the RFP and reaching out to vendors and all that, because that's ultimately going to, pay off. If you try to short circuit the process, you're going to pay for it. You're more than likely going to pay for it at the back end one way or another. So Mike, let me ask you, and then Brad, I'll have you comment as well. We were just talking about ROI and talking about achieving objectives and so forth. I mean, are there any specific sections of the logistics tech market that you feel are either overhyped, or the flip side, undersold?
Well, yeah, I'll start and I'll give you kind of an example of both. Certainly, the AI piece is it's it's the quintessential hype cycle, right? That we see. AI is real. It is going to be extremely valuable, but we see, especially what I would consider, I'll use the term pejoratively, ignorant salespeople that it's essentially their answer to a lot of different things, and there's no meat behind it, right? So and AI, I'm a huge proponent of AI. I use it all the time. I'm a huge proponent of it. We can use it for code. Generative AI can use it for code development. I can use it for test script development. I mentioned the natural language processing capabilities that a lot of the TMS guys are building in, virtual assistants and things like that. Fabulous technology, but we see it being overhyped in the sales cycle. You know, like you, Adrian, I get a lot of demonstrations from software providers, and especially the sales folks that truly do not understand the difference between Gen AI, machine learning, the various flavors of artificial intelligence that can be used. They're doing a disservice to their organizations because people truly don't believe it anymore. And almost, I think I've seen some analysis that said when you're bringing up AI right now, people are just rolling their eyes. Right? It's become almost like a negative unless there's truly something to back it up. The one area that I think, Adrian, that I'm really looking forward, and I'm starting to see green sprouts around this, are what historically have been tech providers providing value-added service after implementation, right? So the ability, because if you think about a tech provider, a multi-tenant tech provider that has access to within their system gigabytes of data, right? So E2Open's been doing this with Blue Decks for forever, right? With their benchmark information, that's a starting point. But Ortec, I thought, was doing some really, really interesting things where they can go back and take, again, routing and scheduling capabilities, but they can go back and run overnight what you ran today and then make recommendations how to improve your optimization heuristics by changing tuning parameters. Things like that, value-added services that the tech providers have kind of stayed away from. Oh, here's your TMS. We'll invoice you monthly based on the fund that's flowing through the TMS. Fabulous. But truly being able to provide insights. The Good Ship fellas, right? I don't know if you've talked with the Good Ship team, but that's essentially their control tower capabilities of being able to extract information, load it into their system, and then provide insights. You know what? You should go to bid on these 4 lanes because you're paying 25% above market, right? There's opportunities for you to move from truckload to intermodal on these lanes right here, and this would be your potential savings. Having the tech providers do things like that would be next generation for us. And again, with their investment in machine learning, their ability, again, and their access to all of these data, a huge opportunity that we would love to see more of. Again, like I mentioned some green shoots that we're seeing from some of those providers I mentioned, but that's an area that I really hope that the tech providers grab onto a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I've been seeing the same thing too, and I've been a big proponent of that for a long time. And I know, I was talking about that, maybe 10, 15 years ago, and you're right. I mean, there was this kind of resistance to doing any kind of value-added services because they always viewed themselves as, well, we're a product company, we're not a services company, right? But I think, now that they recognize that they have all this visibility and this wealth of data that you talked about, right? There's a lot of insights there, and a lot of value added services that they could be providing. And I think those that are recognizing that and taking action on that are really, positioning themselves as that's a differentiator for some of these players that you talked about there. And I think you wrote a guest commentary for us earlier this year, maybe it was last year, about AI. So I'll recommend folks to search for that on Talking Logistics in terms of separating the hype from reality on AI. Because you're right, there is a lot of hype, but unfortunately that hype is turning people off to it. But in reality, there are some areas where it's actually delivering some value. So it's really focusing on the areas that's true, where it's real right now, and not get discouraged by all the other hype that's out there. Brad, how about you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to piggyback on the AI topic that Mike brought up, I think just as a former TMS consultant geek, I think one of the AI things, and Mike mentioned it, is natural language to SQL, giving end users the access to interrogate their systems for data that lives there, but they just don't know how to frame the question to get that data. is an amazing leap forward, I think, for the use and the power, putting in the power into the control of the end user's hands, not a BA or not a technical consultant that knows SQL, is a great facet. And if all we get out of AI is that, I think we're going to be better off, right? So there's a lot of really good, solid nuggets in there that are driving value. I would say there's another theme. This isn't AI necessarily, but it not too long ago, the real-time visibility, real-time tracking and visibility applications were definitely hyped, and now I think we're kind of at maybe the trough of disillusionment, where we've definitely seen the trend. We have clients coming to us saying, we're not sure we're getting the value, right? We're not sure that it's worth the money to pay for visibility, because now we're realizing we're a US-based company. The longest transit time we have is 4 days or 5 days. There's not much we can actually do with this visibility except for just, making us feel good, or potentially looking at some OTIF or managing some detention or things like that. There are pockets where it is required and it is valuable, but we have a lot of clients that are coming back to us and saying, is there a different way? And it's literally going back 15 years and just hooking up EDI or APIs or whatever connectivity we can manage with the carriers, and essentially in-house aggregating the same data and doing it in the old-fashioned way, which is just plugging it into the TMS. Can we get the same outcome and the same benefits from doing it this way for cheaper than $2 a load? In some situations we can, because I think our clients are seeing there's still really big gaps. Every visibility provider still has gaps. Some are great in ocean, terrible in LTL. Some are great with domestic transportation, over the road visibility. They have nothing in Europe. And our clients need everything, but they don't want 10 visibility providers. That's crazy. So I think they're becoming more pragmatic about looking at the outcomes, and then gauging, is it worth the investment to get to these outcomes, or is there a different approach? I think that trend is going to continue, and I love it, frankly, because this means shippers are getting smarter, they're being pragmatic, and that is good for the market.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it just underscores the reality, we were talking about before. There is no one size fits all solution for every shipper, right? And it's ultimately all driven by, the desired outcomes and expectations, and, the cost benefit analysis, right? In terms of what is it exactly they're trying to achieve in this case with visibility, let's say, and are they able to achieve it via different, what are the different ways to achieve this? And, there might be alternate ways of doing it that may not be as quote unquote sexy or whatever, but it's going to meet the need, and it's going to be at a lower cost, and it's going to drive the expected benefits nonetheless. So I think that's a good point there. Yeah, but Brad, Mike, I think we could probably spend another hour here, but maybe as a way to wrap up, and maybe Brad, I'll stick with you, and Mike, you'll have the last word here. I mean, for companies that are planning to invest in new technology, next year, and heading into 2025. I mean, what is the best thing they can do, today to position themselves for implementation success, and maybe what is the biggest mistake they can make?
Yeah, so I'll start. I'm sure Mike will have other comments as well. I through our years of doing this, right? Mike and I have been doing this since the 90s. And looking back at the totality of client implementations that we've done, and it's all been transportation technology for shippers, by and large. The single biggest risk that a client can make with the technology and the implementation of that technology is picking the wrong vendor, right? There are two other things, and I would say through our kind of research and looking back, more than 80% of the risk in a technology implementation gets baked in before the budget is even set. The vendor selection, the proposed implementation plan, timeline, resource availability, mostly between business and IT. Are they ready for this implementation? and how much is the project going to take in terms of cost, timing, and resources. Those four things, in our estimation, contribute to 80% of the risk. All of those things can get figured out before you even start spending the money. So it's a great insurance policy to do the due diligence up front, know who you are. It has to start with you and your business. It can start with the Gartner Magic Quadrant to get a short list of vendors. That's okay, but you're not going to be able to move to the next step until you finally say, here's who we are. These are the functions and the capabilities that are important to us. These are the things that matter for us in the next 5 to 10 years. We could be acquisitive company like Descartes. We could be shedding things. We could be globally expanding. These are the things that the 4x4 or the 2x2 for Gartner Magic Quadrant don't know about you. You have to say, these are our requirements. These are our capabilities. These are the things that are going to drive us, the shipper, forward for the next 10 years. Now, what solution, what technology is right for me? If you figure those things out before you write any huge capital or capital approvals or write any checks, you haven't picked the vendor yet, you can figure all of that stuff out ahead of time. You've eliminated 80% of the risk. That's our premise.
Great advice there. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The other piece is there's a lot of big shippers out there that have tech, right? And again, oftentimes we're coming in, as I mentioned earlier, with a shipper with obsolete tech or no tech at all. But a lot of companies do have tech, and it's interesting the rotation, Adrian, from tier 1 TMS provider. Oh, we're going to kick them out. We're going to go to tier 2 TMS provider. They don't work either. We're going to go to tier 3. Well, why aren't they working, right? So again, it goes back to kind of the common things that we all learned way back in the day: people, process, and technology, right? If you're not getting what you need out of your technology stack that you have right now and your people and the organization, what is the root cause of that? Is it did we make the wrong selection with the TMS, or perhaps we didn't implement it very well, or perhaps we didn't take advantage of all the new capabilities that the TMS provider's been putting out there for forever, just because it was hard, right? So it ties back to, I think, what we've been saying kind of all along here is truly understand yourself, understand where your business is going, understand the key drivers to success, reevaluate your KPIs. I see a lot of silly and ridiculous KPIs out there that, a funny story, when I was working at a wholesale distributor, every month, the VP of transportation would go in and they would talk with the leadership, and she knew exactly how that meeting was going to go based just on fuel prices. If fuel prices were up the last month, she was going to get yelled at. Oh, you're way over budget. If they were down, oh, you're the greatest in the world. Wait a second here. That's probably not truly a KPI that we should be measuring, since it's certainly out of our control. So anyway, again, now it's kind of a golden era, Adrian, in terms of TMS tech. And I say TMS, logistics tech, from yard management to TMS to routing and scheduling and dispatching solutions to procurement solutions, et cetera. There's just wonderful tech out there. Every technology provider is not suited for every different type of shipper. So you do need to be careful. You do need to know yourself. You do need to kind of look in the mirror and say, what do I truly need? How am I going to evaluate? What is truly a good transportation operation for my business? And how does it support the rest of the organization? So I think just doing that and kind of just doing your homework and making sure that you understand what you truly need and what your end state desires are, that will then lead you in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Well, great advice from both of you. I mean, I know certainly, I learned a lot during our conversation. I'm sure many in our audience, learned a lot as well. So I want to thank you both for, making the time to be with us today.
Thanks for having us, Adrian. It's good to see you too.
And I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the JBF Consulting website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Brad or Mike, you can post it there, and I'm sure they'll be both more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.